I never thought my graduation day, the moment I had worked toward for years, would become the most dangerous day of my life. For most people, graduation means joy, freedom, and the start of a new chapter. For me, it was the stage my parents chose to reveal just how far they were willing to go to keep control. The rooftop terrace of the Peninsula Chicago sparkled with luxury. Ice sculptures gleamed in the afternoon sun. A string quartet played elegant music, and the tables overflowed with gourmet food. My parents had spared no expense. To any outsider, it looked like a celebration of success, the proud family honoring their daughter's achievement. But to me, it felt wrong, like a performance. Just a week before, they had called me a worthless leech. Now they were showering me with champagne fountains and photographers. That kind of sudden change wasn't kindness. It was calculation. As I mingled among guests, professors, business partners of my father, distant family friends I barely knew, I kept catching my parents watching me, not with pride, not even with their usual disapproval. Their eyes carried a strange intensity, as though every movement I made had to be monitored. My mother smiled that polished social smile she had perfected for charity galas, but when her face rested, it hardened into something closer to grim determination. My father barely engaged in small talk, instead whispering with the family attorney and checking his phone constantly. It wasn't until I drifted near the champagne table that the truth struck like a thunderbolt. My father stood close to the bartender, his broad frame shielding the tray of glasses. In one sharp, deliberate motion, I saw him slip a white powder from his cuff into a single flute of champagne. He glanced around to be sure no one noticed, then marked that glass by nudging it slightly apart from the others. The sight froze me in place. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't an accident. My father, Joseph Harris, celebrated pharmaceutical mogul, had just poisoned my drink. In that moment, time slowed. A lifetime of warnings about their obsession with control, their disappointment in me, and their fixation on the family image all collided with the horrifying reality. My parents weren't just emotionally abusive. They were prepared to harm me physically, even kill me, to preserve what they valued most. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my expression calm. Years of surviving under their scrutiny had taught me how to mask my emotions. If I reacted now, they would know I had seen. They would adjust their plan, and I needed to understand just how deep this betrayal went. 15 minutes later, my father clinked his glass, drawing the attention of the crowd. "In a few moments, we will have a special champagne toast to the graduate," he announced, with his signature businessman smile. Waiters began arranging glasses on silver trays, ready to distribute them to the guests. But the glass my father had tampered with, slightly cloudy at the bottom where the powder hadn't fully dissolved, remained reserved for me. I stood among my friends, Taylor and Zoe, trying to steady my hands as they recorded videos of the party. My mind raced. What kind of poison had he chosen? Something subtle, surely. Something that could pass as food poisoning, leaving me hospitalized and vulnerable. I had heard my father's voice enough times plotting against competitors to know he never left things to chance. If I ended up in a hospital bed, incapacitated, it would buy them time to shift assets, manipulate documents, maybe even void the inheritance they resented me for receiving. When he finally stepped toward me, holding out that specific glass, I locked eyes with him. His smile was wide, but his gaze was sharp, calculating. I could almost hear the unspoken words, "Drink, and let us handle the rest." Guests around us lifted their glasses high, waiting for me to raise mine. My father's signet ring glinted as he extended the poisoned flute to me, his hand steady, his expression rehearsed. For him, this was just another transaction. For me, it was the moment my entire life hung in the balance, and so I accepted the glass, my mind already spinning through the possibilities. Would I drink and risk everything, refuse and expose myself immediately, or find a way to turn their own plan against them? The bubbles rose slowly in the glass, fizzing against the rim. To the guests, it was champagne. To me, it was a weapon disguised as celebration. And as the orchestra swelled, I realized this wasn't just a toast to my future. It was a test of whether I had one at all. To understand why my parents would ever slip poison into my glass, you need to understand the Harris family. Ours was not the kind of family where love was unconditional or where accomplishments were celebrated with warmth. No, everything in the Harris household was about legacy, reputation, and control. My father, Joseph Harris, wasn't just a businessman. He was a legend in pharmaceuticals. He had built Harris Pharmaceuticals from a modest research lab into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Industry insiders whispered about his ruthless tactics, competitors who mysteriously lost funding, labs that shut down after sudden regulatory hurdles, and rivals who never seemed to recover after crossing him. Publicly, though, he crafted the image of a benevolent philanthropist. Charity galas, scholarship funds, and generous donations painted him as a man who cared deeply about people. Behind closed doors, the truth was very different. My mother, Eleanor, came from old money. Her family had been involved in pharmaceutical development for generations, long before she married my father and merged her company's legacy with his ambi. Idion. If my father represented cold calculation in business, my mother embodied social status and appearances. Our home had been featured in architectural magazines. Charity galas she hosted were the talk of Chicago society. To outsiders, she seemed polished, cultured, and endlessly graceful. But to me, she was a relentless critic. No hairstyle, no outfit, no grade, no smile was ever quite right. Her love, if it existed at all, was conditional upon how well I upheld the Harris image. Then there was my sister, Sophia. 3 years older, she was the golden child, the flawless reflection of everything my parents wanted. Straight A's, debate team captain, piano recitals, Harvard Business School with honors. The list of her achievements was endless. Every trophy, every certificate, every glowing write-up had a place of honor in our home. When Sophia spoke, our parents leaned in. When she succeeded, they radiated pride. To them, she was proof of the Harris legacy. My experience couldn't have been more different. I was no less capable academically. I earned straight A's, I won science fairs, I built projects that caught the attention of mentors and teachers. But in my house, my achievements weren't celebrated, they were expected. That is what we expect from a Harris, my father would mutter, without even looking up from his newspaper. My mother's comments focused on surface details, like my hair in a photo, rather than the award I had just won. The message was clear. No matter how hard I worked, it would never be enough to match Sophia. The roles were set early. Sophia was the heir, the dutiful daughter destined to inherit the company's throne. I was the spare, the one who would follow orders, fill in the gaps, and accept my place in the background. My father envisioned me running the research division while Sophia handled business and leadership. My own dreams and passions had no place in their plan. This constant comparison bred a quiet kind of resentment in me, not toward Sophia, but toward my parents. She had her role, I had mine, and neither of us had much say in it. What they never understood was that my achievements were not about rebellion. They were about survival. I poured myself into science not to earn their approval, but to create an identity they couldn't erase. Looking back now, I can see how their obsession with control and image planted the seeds of what happened at my graduation. To them, my refusal to fall in line was more than disobedience. It was betrayal. And betrayal, in their world, demanded punishment. So when I watched my father tip white powder into my glass that day, I realized it wasn't sudden. It was the final act of a story that had been unfolding my entire life. From as early as I can remember, my future had been mapped out for me. My parents didn't ask me what I wanted to do or who I wanted to become. They told me. To them, my life was just another extension of the Harris empire. I would major in pharmaceutical sciences, work in the family labs, and eventually take over the research division while Sophia ran the business side. The script had been written long before I could even spell the word career. At first, as a child desperate for approval, I tried to comply. I studied hard, excelled in science, and won awards they barely noticed. But as I grew older, something inside me began to resist. My love for science wasn't rooted in making drugs for profit. What fascinated me was the environment, how chemicals, waste, and human innovation affected ecosystems. While my parents glorified revenue reports, I found myself drawn to research on pharmaceutical runoff contaminating rivers and the impact of toxins on wildlife. It wasn't glamorous or profitable, but it mattered to me. By junior year of high school, I knew what I wanted: Northwestern. As environmental science program, it was a bold choice, one that I knew would ignite a firestorm at home. When I brought it up over dinner, the reaction was volcanic. My father slammed his fist against the table, his face flushed with rage. "You will not throw away your future chasing tree-hugger nonsense," he spat. "You are a Harris. You will study biochemistry and you will work in the company." End of discussion. My mother's reaction was different, but no less manipulative. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched at her pearls. "Think of what this will do to the family. Do you want to shame us? To betray generations of work and sacrifice? We built all of this for you." But for once, I stood my ground. I told them I wasn't abandoning science. I was choosing a branch that could make a real difference. I told them I would apply to Northwestern regardless of their approval. The days that followed were filled with icy silence. They refused to speak to me for weeks. Meals were eaten in cold silence. Footsteps echoed in empty halls, and every glance from them carried quiet condemnation. Eventually, they compromised, though compromise was too generous a word. They would pay for my education on one condition: I had to minor in biochemistry and spend summers interning at Harris Pharmaceuticals. To them, it was a leash disguised as generosity. To me, it was partial freedom. When I finally got to Northwestern, I felt a rush of relief. Away from the constant pressure, I could breathe. I could choose my classes, meet people who valued me for who I was, and chase research that truly excited me. But even then, the Harris shadow loomed. Every holiday break was a battlefield of passive-aggressive remarks. Every email was filled with opportunities at the company that I was expected to consider. By junior year, the pressure escalated. My father sent job descriptions directly to my inbox. My mother forwarded glowing articles about pharmaceutical executives, not so subtly hinting that I could be next. When I landed an internship with an environmental nonprofit instead of their lab, the mask slipped again. My father threatened to cut me off financially. My mother called me ungrateful. That summer, I worked at the nonprofit anyway, scraping by with part-time jobs and scholarships. By senior year, I was covering tuition myself with loans. Every paycheck I earned, every dollar I borrowed, was proof that I could stand without them. But what they didn't know was that I had something else, a secret weapon, courtesy of the one person in my family who had ever truly seen me, my grandmother, Lillian. Before she died when I was 16, she had sat me down and said something I would never forget. "Promise me you'll follow your own path, no matter how hard it gets. The Harris name is heavy, but it doesn't have to crush you." Unbeknownst to my parents, she had left me a trust fund. It was carefully locked away with independent trustees, set to transfer to me at 23 or upon graduation, whichever came last. The amount? $12 million, enough to make me financially independent forever, enough to make me untouchable. When my parents discovered it, only 3 months before graduation, their rage was uncontainable. My father had turned pale when the attorney mentioned it. My mother's lips thinned into a line sharper than glass. That trust in their minds was money stolen from them, money they deserved, money I had no right to wield. To them, it wasn't just about inheritance. It was about control slipping from their hands. From that moment, their behavior shifted. The relentless criticism stopped. The pressure eased. Instead, they became unusually quiet. Then, weeks later, they suddenly offered to throw me a graduation party. A proper celebration befitting a Harris, my mother had said. I should have known right then. The calm was not forgiveness. It was preparation. They weren't done with me. They were planning their final move. The weeks leading up to graduation felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. After years of constant arguments, passive-aggressive comments, and relentless pressure, my parents' sudden silence should have been a relief. Instead, it unsettled me. It was as though a storm had passed, but instead of blue skies, the air hung heavy with tension. Normally, my father would bombard me with emails about job openings at the company, pushing me to accept a future I never wanted. My mother would call daily, critiquing my choices or reminding me of the duty I owed to the family name. But that spring, all of it stopped. No harsh emails, no guilt-laden phone calls. Instead, my mother phoned one morning with a cheerful tone I hadn't heard in years. "We want to throw you a graduation party, Danielle," she said smoothly. "Something worthy of a Harris. Your accomplishments deserve to be celebrated." Her words rang false. My accomplishments had never mattered to them before. Why now? And why in such a grand way? She spoke of rooftop venues, orchestras, champagne fountains, and a guest list filled with distinguished friends of the family. It sounded less like a party for me and more like a Harris corporate gala. Still, I agreed, uneasy but curious. Graduation day itself began with the same cold detachment I had grown up with. Outside the auditorium, my mother greeted me with a critical eye rather than pride. "Could you not have done something more with your hair?" she asked. "No congratulations, no we're proud of you. Just image management, as always." My father scrolled through his phone, half present, his mind clearly elsewhere. Sophia, my sister, offered me a sympathetic smile from the sidelines. The ceremony passed in a blur, names called, diplomas handed out, cheers echoing in the auditorium. Taylor and Zoe, my best friends, screamed, the loudest when my name was read. My parents clapped politely, their faces unreadable, their applause mechanical. Afterward, a car whisked us to the Peninsula Hotel. As I stepped onto the rooftop terrace, I was stunned by the scale of the celebration. Ice sculptures glistened in the sun. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Photographers circled the room, snapping endless photos. Gourmet catering stations lined the edges of the terrace. Everywhere I looked, extravagance. It was beautiful, but it wasn't for me. Half the guests were business associates of my father, men in tailored suits networking over champagne. Others were my mother's socialite friends, dripping in designer jewelry and gossiping about upcoming galas. Very few were people I actually knew. The message was clear. This wasn't about honoring my graduation. It was about image, appearances, and using me as a prop. Still, I tried to settle in. That's when I noticed something strange. My parents weren't mingling naturally as they usually would. Instead, they kept repositioning themselves, always ensuring I was in their line of sight. Their expressions weren't proud or even coldly indifferent. They were watchful, calculating. Sophia, ever perceptive, sidled up to me at the hors d'oeuvre table. "Something weird is going on," she whispered. "Dad asked me 3 times if you mentioned your plans after graduation, and Mom keeps checking her watch like she's waiting for something." Before I could respond, I caught sight of my father speaking with the head waiter, pointing to a specific bottle of champagne, the one with the gold label. "That one," I heard him say, "for the family only." My stomach tightened. The same dread I had felt growing for weeks now sharpened into certainty. Their sudden silence, their lavish generosity, their unusual focus on me. This wasn't reconciliation. It was strategy. Minutes later, as guests laughed and mingled, I slipped away to a quieter corridor. Around the corner, hushed voices echoed. "Are you absolutely certain this is necessary?" My mother's tone was sharp, almost panicked. "Do you want to lose everything we've built?" My father hissed back. "The trust gives her independence. If she talks about the contamination at the West facility, we're finished. This is the only way." I pressed against the wall, every muscle rigid. Their words pierced through the noise of the party, shattering the fragile illusion. They weren't just controlling me. They were planning to poison me. I returned to the terrace minutes later, my hands trembling so badly I had to grip my clutch to hide it. The orchestra played. Guests chatted, oblivious. But I knew. The calm was over. The storm had arrived. The announcement came with the sharp clink of crystal. My father raised his glass high, his commanding voice cutting through the noise of the rooftop terrace. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his smile broad and polished, "in just a few moments we will toast my daughter's future. Please be sure you have a glass in hand." The room buzzed with polite applause and cheerful chatter. Waiters hurried between guests with silver trays, passing out flutes of sparkling champagne. But not all champagne was equal. I watched closely as my father hovered over the bartender, personally ensuring that a particular bottle, the one with the gold label, was poured only for our family. The flute meant for me sat slightly apart from the rest. To anyone else, it looked no different, but I saw the faint cloudiness at the bottom where the powder had failed to fully dissolve. My father's meticulous attention to detail had one flaw. Chemistry is unforgiving, and I knew exactly what I was looking at. Taylor, sensing my tension, leaned close. "Are you okay?" "Record this," I whispered quickly. "The whole toast, especially when my father hands me my glass." She didn't ask questions. Taylor never did. She's Sim. Ply pulled out her phone, angled it discreetly, and hit record. When my father finally approached, everything slowed. He handed a glass to my mother, then one to Sophia. And then he turned to me. His eyes met mine, the glint of his signet ring catching the light as he extended the poisoned flute. "To Danielle," he said loudly, his voice ringing with false pride. "May your future be everything you deserve." The double meaning wasn't lost on me. I accepted the glass, careful not to let it touch my lips. The orchestra swelled in the background, and all around us, guests lifted their flutes high. My father had orchestrated every detail, ensuring the spectacle looked flawless. To them, it was a toast. To me, it was a death sentence disguised as celebration. My mind raced. If I refused, it would raise suspicion, and they'd find another way. If I simply poured it out, I'd have no proof. I needed evidence. I needed them trapped in their own plan. Then, in a moment of clarity, the solution came. If I drank, I would fall. But if someone else drank first, the truth would be undeniable. I turned, smiling brightly, and raised my voice. "Speaking of my amazing sister, I wouldn't be here without her. She deserves a proper toast, too." Before anyone could react, I pressed my untouched glass into Sophia's hand and smoothly took hers in return. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but social training took over. She smiled and lifted the flute, unaware. "To family," I declared, raising her safe champagne toward the crowd. "To family," the guests echoed. And with that, Sophia drank deeply from the poisoned glass. I sipped lightly from hers, my eyes locked on my father's. His face froze, the mask slipping for just an instant. Horror, fury, and panic flickered across his features, quickly replaced by forced cheer as guests clapped and the music resumed. My mother's hand tightened around her own glass, her knuckles white, her practiced smile cracking at the edges. I moved through the crowd afterward, chatting with professors and family acquaintances, but every nerve in my body was focused on Sophia. 20 minutes passed. 30. Then, across the terrace, I heard a soft gasp. Sophia pressed a hand to her forehead, her voice slurring. "I feel strange." The crowd parted as she staggered, her knees buckling. A junior associate caught her just before she hit the ground. "Help! Something's wrong!" Guests rushed in. My parents dropped all pretenses, pushing through the throng in genuine panic now that their golden child was the one collapsing. My father cradled her head as she mumbled incoherently, her skin pale and clammy. My mother's composure shattered as she screamed, "Call an ambulance!" Dr. Lewis, my mentor, appeared at my side, his face tight with concern. He checked Sophia's pulse quickly. "Elevated and irregular," he muttered. "She's in trouble." I stayed outwardly calm, but inside, guilt twisted like a knife. I hadn't meant for her to drink it. I hadn't planned for this. All I wanted was proof, leverage to stop my parents. Instead, my sister, the one person who had ever shown me a shred of kindness in that family, was paying the price. An ambulance siren wailed in the distance. Paramedics stormed the terrace minutes later, their urgency slicing through the chaos. They loaded Sophia onto a gurney as my mother sobbed hysterically, mascara streaking down her face. My father turned to me then, his voice low and venomous. "What did you do?" "Nothing," I said calmly, though my heart pounded. She drank from my glass. "Remember the special champagne you picked out for me?" His face drained of color. For once, Joseph Harris, the master manipulator, was trapped. As the gurney disappeared into the ambulance, I felt the weight of every choice pressing down on me. I had evidence now, proof that they had tried to poison me. But at what cost? My sister was fighting for her life. The ambulance tore through Chicago traffic, its sirens cutting a path to the hospital. I followed behind with Taylor and Zoe, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. Sophia was unconscious by the time we reached Northwestern Memorial. Her skin had turned ashen, her pulse erratic, her breathing shallow. Doctors rushed her inside while my mother wailed dramatically to anyone within earshot. I forced myself to focus. This wasn't just about emotion anymore. It was about survival, and the only weapon I had was the truth. I approached the nurse's station and spoke with urgency but precision. "My sister has ingested a toxin," I said. "You need to test for experimental anticholinergic compounds, cyclopentolate derivatives specifically. My father works with modified versions at Harris Pharmaceuticals." The nurse blinked, startled by the specificity, but my tone must have carried weight. Minutes later, I was face to face with Dr. Patel, the attending physician. She looked me up and down, skeptical. "That's a very narrow suggestion," she said. "Why do you believe that's the case?" "Because I believe my father poisoned her," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. The champagne she drank was meant for me. Dr. Patel didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply picked up the phone and ordered toxicology tests expanded beyond the standard panel. Within an hour, the emergency room had transformed into something closer to a crime scene. Police officers stood near the doors, taking notes, while detectives began separating my parents for questioning. My mother, disheveled and weeping, cried about her precious daughter. My father demanded his attorney, his fury poorly disguised as indignation. Detective Rivera introduced herself to me, mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that demanded honesty. "Walk me through what happened," she said, flipping open in her notebook. So I did. I told her about overhearing my parents whispering in the service corridor, about my father slipping powder into the champagne flute, about the switch with Sophia, about how I had seen the faint cloudiness in the glass, about the trust fund that would revert to them if I died before graduation. Every word felt like a knife in my own chest, but I laid it out anyway. Rivera listened quietly, her pen scratching across the page. When I finished, she looked up. "And you knowingly let your sister drink it?" Her question hit harder than anything my parents had ever said. My chest tightened. "I thought it would only make her sick," I whispered. "I needed proof. I didn't think it could kill her. I made a terrible decision." Before Rivera could respond, Dr. Patel entered, holding a tablet. "Preliminary toxicology results are in," she announced. "We found elevated levels of a modified anticholinergic compound, similar to cyclopentolate but not an exact match. This is a research-grade substance not yet commercially available." "In English?" Rivera asked. "It's a lab-created drug," Dr. Patel explained. "It would mimic severe food poisoning but with added cardiovascular stress. Without rapid intervention, it could be lethal." "Will she survive?" I asked, my throat dry. Dr. Patel's expression softened slightly. "We're administering physostigmine as an antidote. She's in serious condition, but stable for now. If you hadn't mentioned that compound, the delay could have caused permanent heart damage." Relief and guilt crashed over me all at once. Sophia was alive for now, but the truth was undeniable. My parents had nearly killed her, and me by extension. Rivera's gaze hardened. "This matches your account. Combined with your friend's video of the toast, that's enough to escalate this to attempted murder. As if on cue, my father stormed into the consultation room, flanked by his attorney, Gerald Thorne. "This is outrageous," he thundered. "My daughter has always been unstable. She's jealous of her sister's success and has fabricated this ridiculous story." Rivera didn't even blink. "Mr. Harris, we have toxicology evidence, eyewitness testimony, and video showing you handed your daughter a specific glass. You're not under arrest yet, but I suggest you cooperate." Thorne placed a business card on the table, his voice slick with arrogance. "Any further questions will go through me. The Harris family is prominent in this community. We expect discretion." Rivera picked up the card with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Noted," she said flatly. Moments later, Dr. Lewis, my mentor, arrived, visibly shaken. "Danielle," he said urgently, "what happened? They're saying Joseph tried to poison you." Before I could answer, a nurse entered. "Sophia is asking for you," she said softly. When I stepped into her room, my heart twisted. My sister, always flawless, always untouchable, lay pale and fragile, hooked up to monitors. Her eyelids fluttered open as I took her hand. "Is it true?" she whispered hoarsely. "Did Dad really try to poison you?" Tears burned in my eyes. "Yes, and I'm so sorry you drank it instead. I just reacted. I didn't think." "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The trust. The FDA investigation. They were afraid I'd expose what they've been hiding." Her grip tightened weakly. "The sealed reports," she murmured. "I saw them last month. Heavy metal readings, disposal logs. I didn't understand what I was looking at. They've been dumping waste into the watershed." Before I could respond, Rivera re-entered with another officer. "Miss Harris, we've confirmed the FBI has been investigating Harris Pharmaceuticals for 6 months for fraud, environmental violations, falsification of clinical trial data. Search warrants are being executed right now." I stared at her, stunned. The truth was bigger than I had imagined. Poison wasn't the end of their crimes. It was only the beginning. The weeks that followed felt like a blur, as though my life had been rewritten overnight. One moment, I was a graduate celebrating with friends. The next, I was a key witness in a case that threatened to dismantle one of the most powerful pharmaceutical dynasties in Chicago. The FBI wasted no time. Search warrants hit both the Harris corporate offices and our family home. Boxes of documents, hard drives, and sealed reports were carted away under flashing cameras. News of the raid broke within hours, splashed across front pages. Pharmaceutical CEO under federal investigation. But it was the poisoning that transformed the story into a national spectacle. Detective Rivera visited often, keeping me updated while preparing me for what lay ahead. "The evidence is damning," she said during one late-night meeting. "The video shows your father handing you the glass. The toxicology report matches compounds from his private lab. And now, the financial motive. Your grandmother's trust. It paints a very clear picture. Clear to law enforcement, perhaps, but my father had no intention of letting his empire crumble quietly." The preliminary hearing arrived in late June. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters, cameras flashing as Sophia and I stepped out of the car. She was still pale, her movements cautious, but she insisted on walking beside me. "I need to look them in the eye," she told me. Inside, the air was thick with tension. My parents sat at the defense table, immaculately dressed despite weeks in detention. My mother dabbed at her eyes, her performance as the grieving parent in full display. My father sat rigid, his jaw clenched, staring straight ahead as those. Its sheer willpower could erase the evidence. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. First came the video, Taylor's recording of the toast. The courtroom fell silent as the footage showed my father pointing out the champagne bottle, carefully handing me a specific glass, and my subtle switch with Sophia. Gasps rippled through the spectators when they saw the powdery residue swirl at the bottom of the flute. Next came the toxicology report. Dr. Patel testified that Sophia's blood work revealed a modified anticholinergic compound, One signed out from Harris Pharmaceuticals' research facility only days before the party. The dosage calculations, found in my father's private office, matched exactly. The financial motive followed, the trust my grandmother had left me. Documents showed that if I had died before the official transfer, the funds, over $12 million, would have reverted to my parents as next of kin. It was a motive both cold and undeniable. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when the prosecution revealed a recorded phone call. From inside the detention center, my father had called a business associate, instructing him to clean up the river samples and muttering that Danielle was always the problem child, never understanding family loyalty. The words landed like a hammer blow. My mother collapsed into theatrical sobs. My father's mask cracked for the first time, his fury simmering just below the surface. When the defense finally spoke, their strategy was clear: discredit me. Danielle Harris has always been troubled, my father said when called to testify, his voice calm, measured, convincing to anyone who didn't know him. She was jealous of her sister's success, resentful of our expectations. She's fabricated this elaborate story to destroy her own family. The words stung, not because they surprised me, but because they were so familiar. It was the same narrative he had spun my whole life, that I was the difficult one, the disappointment, the problem. But this time, I wasn't alone. When reporters outside the courthouse pressed us for comment, Sophia stepped forward. Cameras flashed. Microphones surged forward. Her voice, though still weak, carried steady conviction. "My sister saved my life," she said firmly. "Our parents tried to poison her, and when she realized it, she had seconds to decide what to do. She made a choice that has haunted her, but the only people responsible are Joseph and Eleanor Harris. They were willing to kill their own daughter for money and to cover up their crimes. That is the story you should be telling. For the first time in years, my sister wasn't the perfect Harris daughter. She wasn't defending them or standing silently on their side. She was standing beside me." The hearing ended with the judge ruling there was more than enough evidence to proceed to trial on all counts, including attempted murder. My father's jaw clenched tighter, his face like stone. My mother clung to his arm, trembling, her tears smeared across carefully applied makeup. As they were led out, reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed like lightning, but I barely noticed. For the first time in my life, I felt the scales tipping, not just in court, but in my own heart. For years, they had controlled the narrative. Now the truth was finally breaking free, and this time, the world was watching. In the days after the hearing, I expected relief to wash over me. Instead, I felt strangely hollow. The headlines screamed about my parents' arrest, the trial dates, the fraud uncovered at Harris Pharmaceuticals. Everyone wanted interviews, sound bites, insights. But when the cameras turned off and the reporters left, I was just Danielle, a 22-year-old who had nearly been murdered by her own parents and was left trying to figure out what see me next. Sophia was discharged from the hospital into the care of our Aunt Patricia, who had flown in from Seattle the moment she heard. Patricia wasn't someone we knew well growing up. My mother had kept her at arm's length, but she stepped in like a steady anchor. I always knew Eleanor could be cruel, she told me over coffee one morning at the hospital cafeteria. But this? I should have stayed closer to you girls. I'm sorry. Her words made me realize how isolated our parents had kept us, walling us off even from family who might have softened their control. As Sophia recovered physically, the emotional scars began surfacing. For years she had been the golden child, the shining example. Now, as she pieced together the reality of our parents' manipulation, guilt weighed heavily on her. "I defended them," she confessed one evening as we sat together in her recovery room. Her voice cracked as tears slid down her cheeks. "Every time you complained, I told you to be grateful. I thought they were strict because they wanted the best for us. And all along, they were hiding crimes, covering up contamination, lying to me too. I was their puppet." I squeezed her hand. You weren't a puppet, Sophia. You were their shield. As long as you were the perfect one, they could dismiss me as the problem. It kept the illusion intact. That conversation marked a shift. For the first time in our lives, we weren't competitors in our parents' twisted hierarchy. We were allies, bound by betrayal, but also by the chance to build something new. When Sophia was well enough to leave the hospital, she moved into my small apartment temporarily. It was cramped with textbooks stacked in corners and barely enough room for 2 people, but we made it work. We cooked together, stayed up late talking, and slowly learned how to be sisters without the shadow of our parents looming over us. One night, while sharing takeout on the couch, Sophia laughed suddenly, the sound surprising both of us. Do you realize this is the first time in years we've just existed without them telling us who to be? I smiled, feeling a rare lightness. Feels good, doesn't it? Beyond the walls of that apartment, chaos swirled. FBI investigations, lawsuits, reporters camping outside. But inside, we were carving out something fragile and real. Of course, reality pressed in quickly. Lawyers reached out about dividing personal assets, trustees finalized the transfer of my grandmother's inheritance, and prosecutors requested our continued cooperation. For the first time, Sophia and I faced choices not as pawns, but as decision-makers. Did we want to claim any part of the Harris fortune? Did we want to tie ourselves to the company's future? The answer, for both of us, was clear. No, Sophia said firmly during a meeting with our attorney. We don't want Harris Pharmaceuticals, not a cent of it. The employees deserve protection. The communities deserve justice. But we want nothing to do with the empire that nearly destroyed us. Hearing her speak those words, I felt pride swell in my chest. The golden child was gone. In her place stood a woman determined to chart her own course. For me, that was the beginning of true freedom. Not the moment my father's plan failed, not the courtroom drama, but this. 2 sisters, for the first time, choosing to rebuild on their own terms. The months after the courtroom hearing were a strange mixture of chaos and clarity. On one hand, the world seemed to collapse around the Harris empire. Former executives stepped forward with testimonies of fraud. Environmental reports confirmed years of illegal dumping into rivers and groundwater near the West facility. Families of victims filed lawsuits claiming their loved ones had died from drugs rushed through falsified clinical trials. The name Harris no longer inspired admiration. It had become shorthand for corruption and betrayal. On the other hand, my own world began slowly to rebuild. With the trust my grandmother left me now fully transferred, I had the one thing my parents had always tried to deny me: independence. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without waiting for a hand to tighten around my throat. I decided early on that the inheritance couldn't just be about me. My parents had poisoned communities long before they tried to poison me, so I established a foundation dedicated to funding healthcare, water testing, and environmental cleanup in the areas most affected by Harris Pharmaceuticals' negligence. It couldn't undo the damage, but it was a start. My grandmother's gift would no longer fuel the empire. It would heal the wounds it had caused. Sophia, too, found a new path. In the hospital, she had been overwhelmed with guilt and confusion, but once the fog lifted, she saw her role with new clarity. She resigned immediately from Harris Pharmaceuticals, cooperating with investigators to identify which executives were complicit. Then, to my surprise, she announced she was applying to law school. I want to specialize in environmental law, she told me one night at the lake house, where we had retreated for peace. If Dad taught me anything, it's how easy it is for powerful people to bury the truth. I want to be on the other side of that fight. For the first time, I saw Sophia not as the perfect heir to our parents, but as her own person, choosing a purpose that wasn't defined by their expectations. Meanwhile, the legal system pressed forward. Our parents were denied bail, deemed flight risks because of their extensive overseas accounts. The prosecution built a case stacked with evidence: the poisoned champagne, the toxicology results, financial documents, environmental reports, and even my father's recorded call from detention. The plea deal came 6 months after the poison, eyeing 20 years for my father on attempted murder and environmental crimes, 15 for my mother if she testified about the corporate fraud. "They want to know if we object," Sophia said, setting down her phone after a call with the prosecutors. I stared out at the lake, watching the winter sun glint off the frozen surface. Part of me wanted them dragged through a full trial, their crimes laid bare for the world to see. Another part of me wanted it over. An end to the constant dredging of memories, the endless cycle of questions and testimony. "We don't need to carry this forever," I said finally. "Let them take the deal. What matters is that it's done." When sentencing day arrived, I sat in the gallery with Sophia beside me. Our parents looked smaller than I'd ever seen them. My mother wept quietly as the judge detailed her crimes. My father stood defiant, using his statement not to apologize, but to frame himself as a visionary misunderstood by regulators. He never mentioned the poisoned champagne. He never once looked at me. As the bailiff led them away, a wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't joy, it was release. For the first time in years, I didn't feel their shadow stretching over my every step. Afterward, outside the courthouse, I was met not just by Taylor and Zoe, but by Dr. Lewis and new colleagues from the environmental firm where I'd begun consulting. They weren't family by blood, but they were family by choice. They had stood beside me through the darkest storm, and they were still there now that the clouds had lifted. Sophia slipped her hand into mine. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," I said, looking at the cameras flashing in the distance. "We start living for ourselves. Not for them, not against them, just for us." For the first time, the future didn't terrify me. It felt like freedom. A year after the night that changed everything, I stood at a podium speaking to a conference on pharmaceutical environmental impact. My heart pounded as I explained new approaches to remediation, but when I glanced at the audience, my fear melted. There was Sophia, recording proudly on her phone. Beside her sat Taylor and Zoe, Dr. Lewis, and a growing circle of people who had become my true support system. For the first time in my life, I felt what real belonging meant. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had tried to poison me, to silence me, to keep me under their control. But their betrayal had forced me to find my voice. They had wanted to end my future. Instead, they had given me one. Looking back, I realized the real poison hadn't just been in the champagne glass. It was in the years of manipulation, the conditional love, the suffocating expectation that I would sacrifice myself for the Harris legacy. That was the toxin that nearly consumed me. And the antidote wasn't money, or revenge, or even justice. The antidote was truth. The truth set me free to carve my own path. The truth gave Sophia and me the chance to finally be sisters instead of rivals. The truth gave victims of Harris Pharmaceuticals the power to demand accountability. Truth doesn't erase pain, but it transforms it into something stronger. Sometimes I wonder if forgiveness is possible, but forgiveness requires remorse, and I don't think my parents are capable of it, so I don't carry that burden anymore. I don't live for them or against them. I live for myself. For the promise I made to my grandmother, for the communities harmed by greed, for the family I've built by choice, not blood. And that's the message I want to leave with you. Blood relation does not entitle anyone to hurt you. Sometimes the most toxic people in your life share your last name, and sometimes the most loving family are the honest. As you create along the way, if you've ever had to protect yourself from people who were supposed to love you, know this: it doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong enough to choose yourself. So I'll ask you the same question I've asked myself. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to step away from a toxic family dynamic? What helped you find the strength to move forward? If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Share where you're watching from, and if you want to hear more stories of survival, resilience, and renewal, hit that like button and subscribe. Because in the end, the most powerful antidote to poison, whether it's in a glass or in a family legacy, is truth. And truth, once spoken, can never be silenced.